Greetings, seekers of forgotten truths. Welcome back to our quiet space, where shadows lengthen and the whispers of other worlds grow clearer. Tonight, our journey takes us to Roshar, a land sculpted by storms and scarred by ancient wars. A shard world vibrant with investiture and teeming with unique life adapted to the crushing power of its high storms. We seek an order shrouded in fear, their name often spoken in hushed tones, synonymous with destruction. The Dustbringers, or as they knew themselves, the Releasers. Their power is that of unmaking, the surge of division, capable of turning stone to dust and mountains to memory. Yet, behind the smoke and ash lies a story far more complex, one of control, responsibility, and the terrible burden of wielding entropy itself. So, find your comfort, quiet the storms within, and let us sift through the embers of history to uncover the true nature of this powerful, misunderstood order within the grand tapestry of the Cosmere. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now let's begin. Roshar itself is a world defined by extremes. Its supercontinent is relentlessly scoured by high storms, colossal weather systems born from the clash of investiture and nature, rolling eastward with destructive force. Life here has adapted in extraordinary ways. Plants retract into the stony ground, animals possess hardened carapaces, and human settlements huddle in the lee of mountains or within vast chasms like the shattered plains. This is a land shaped by cycles of destruction and rebirth, presided over by the remnants of shattered gods, known as shards, primarily honor and cultivation, whose influence permeates the very fabric of existence, and haunted by the ever-present threat of odium, the shard of divine hatred. It is against this backdrop of perpetual conflict and elemental fury that the legends of the Knights Radiant were forged. 10 orders of surge-binding warriors bonded to sentient manifestations of investiture called Spren. They were paragons of honor, protectors of mankind against the cyclical desolations, apocalypses brought by odium's forces, the Voidbringers. They wielded stormlight, the very essence of the high storms, to fuel incredible powers, the surges, gifts once held by their divine patrons, the heralds. Among these 10 legendary orders, the Dustbringers occupy a place of unique apprehension. Even in modern Roshar, centuries after the Radiants abandoned their oaths in the event known as the Recreance, the name Dustbringer evokes images of uncontrolled destruction, of ash and ruin. They are often depicted as agents of chaos, their powers too dangerous, too volatile, yet their own chosen name, the Releasers, hints at a different philosophy, a different purpose. It suggests not wanton destruction, but perhaps a controlled unmaking, a release from form, from structure, from existence itself, but guided by principle and ideal. This fundamental dichotomy lies at the heart of their story. The terrifying power of the surge of division, the ability to command entropy, stands in stark contrast to the likely internal focus on absolute control and responsibility that must have defined the releasers. How does one embody restraint while holding the power to unravel the very bonds of matter? How does an order dedicated, like all radiants, to the ideals of honor and cultivation, wield a force seemingly antithetical to creation and preservation? This tension, this gap between the terrifying perception embodied by the name Dustbringer and the controlled purpose suggested by Releaser is the central thread we shall follow tonight. It suggests that their misunderstood nature isn't merely a result of external fear, but perhaps an inherent philosophical challenge embedded within the Order's very existence. The visceral, undeniable reality of turning stone to dust is easily grasped and feared. The immense discipline and restrictive ideals required to wield such power responsibly remain hidden, lost to time or overshadowed by the dramatic results of their surge. We will explore the origins of the Order, tracing their lineage back to their heraldic patron, the enigmatic Chanarok. We will dissect the very mechanics of their power, this surge of division, seeking to understand its potential and its perils within the framework of Cosmere physics. We will speculate on the lost ideals they swore, oaths that must have centered on the immense burden of control and consequence. We will sift through the fragmented history of Roshar, seeking glimpses of the Releasers in action during the Desolations, understanding their role among the other Radiant Orders, and tracing the evolution of their fearsome reputation. We will confront the myths surrounding them, analyzing why they inspire such unique dread compared to other wielders of potent magic. We will contemplate their role in the recreance, the day the Radiants fell silent, and consider the unique pressures that might have led these masters of unmaking to abandon their bonds. And finally, we will look to the flickering embers of their re-emergence in the modern era, examining the complex figure of Malata and pondering the future of an order defined by destruction in a world desperately seeking salvation. We seek not to glorify their power, nor to dismiss the fear they inspire, but to find the nuance, the truth hidden within the ash. Let the story begin. Every order of the Knights Radiant draws its spiritual and philosophical lineage from one of the 10 heralds, immortal figures who founded the orders and bore the brunt of suffering through millennia of warfare and torture to protect Roshar. These heralds, gifted with honor blades that granted surge binding even without a spren bond, embodied divine attributes that resonated with the nature of their respective orders. For the Dustbringers, or Releasers, their patron is Chanarok, often called Chana, herald of the common man, bearer of the divine attributes brave and obedient. At first glance, this patronage seems paradoxical. How could an order defined by the destructive surge of division, the power of unmaking, be aligned with a herald embodying obedience? Bravery, perhaps, seems fitting. It would take immense courage to wield such volatile power, to face the consequences of its use, and to stand on battlefields where such destruction is necessary. But obedience, it conjures images of subservience, of following orders, which feels disconnected from the seemingly chaotic nature of division. Yet, considering the immense danger inherent in the surge of division, this combination of bravery and obedience begins to reveal a deeper logic. Chanarok's bravery might not just be the courage to fight, but the courage to wield a power that could easily consume the user or cause catastrophic collateral damage. It's the bravery to accept the terrible responsibility that comes with commanding entropy. And her obedience might not signify blind compliance to any authority, but rather a profound adherence to strictures, to laws, to the rigorous self-control and meticulous principles necessary to manage such a dangerous surge. Think of it as the unwavering obedience to the laws of physics required by a master demolitions expert, or the absolute adherence to sterile procedure demanded of a surgeon. It's the obedience to the rules of control, the internal discipline required to prevent disaster. In this light, Chanarok's attributes transform from a contradiction into a necessary foundation for an order like the Releasers. They represent the courage to hold the power of unmaking, and the unwavering discipline required to keep it leashed. Information about Chanarok herself is frustratingly scarce, gleaned mostly from fleeting appearances in visions, ancient texts, and the terrified memories of her fellow herald, Talonel. We know she was one of the 10 who agreed to the Oath Pact, sacrificing her afterlife to be repeatedly tortured between desolations. Her return to Roshar, signaling the start of a new war. Like all heralds, save Talon, she eventually broke under torture, abandoning the Oath Pact and leaving humanity to face the false desolation and subsequent centuries alone. Her appearances in Dalinar Kholon's visions, granted by the Stormfather, often depict her as fiery, determined, perhaps even stern, a figure who embodies resolve. Some accounts associate her with the color ash or dark red, aligning visually with the themes of her order. Her torment between desolations, endlessly repeated, must have been profound, perhaps uniquely shaped by the nature of the powers she represented, constantly facing unmaking. Destruction and the breaking of things, mirroring the breaking of her own spirit under torture. Her suffering serves as a stark reminder of the cost associated with the powers the Radiants wielded, a cost she bore for millennia. Just as each herald serves as a patron, each Radiant Order is defined by the type of spren they bond. For the Releasers, these are the Ash Spren. Like much concerning this order, direct descriptions are rare, but we can infer their nature. They likely appear in the physical realm as phenomena related to their surge. perhaps resembling cracks in objects filled with glowing embers, shimmering heat haze that distorts the air, or forms made of flowing ash or smoke. In the cognitive realm, Shadesmar, they would likely have a distinct form and personality, though their specific appearance remains largely undescribed in canonical texts. The fundamental nature of Ash Spren raises intriguing questions. Are they drawn to acts of destruction, like Flamespren cluster around fire? Or are they attracted to the potential for controlled decay, to the precise application of entropy? Given the likely stringent ideals of the releasers, the latter seems more probable. A spren embodying pure, uncontrolled destruction would likely be incompatible with the Nahel bond, which requires a resonance between the Spren's nature and the Radiant's oaths. Oaths almost certainly centered on control. Perhaps Ash Spren perceived the world in terms of bonds, connections, and structures, and are drawn to individuals capable of manipulating these bonds with precision and purpose, rather than mere chaos. Their cognitive forms might reflect this. Perhaps intricate, fractured patterns, or beings that constantly shift and reform, embodying the balance between structure and dissolution. Compared to Honor Spren, who embody oaths, or Cultivation Spren, who embody growth, Ash Spren might embody the necessary process of decay, the breaking down that allows for renewal, but only when guided by intent and control. Their origins, like those of many Spren, are tied to the broader Cosmere mythology. Spren are fragments of investiture, splinters of the divine power of the shards present on Roshar, primarily honor and cultivation, but potentially influenced by odium, or even Adonalsium, the original creator deity of the Cosmere. Ash Spren could be splinters reflecting the natural forces of entropy, decay accelerated and guided by cultivation's influence, or perhaps related to the destructive aspects inherent in storms and geology, tied to Honor's domain of binding forces, and thus unbinding them. Some theories even posit connections to odium, given the destructive nature of division, but this seems less likely for a Spren, capable of forming a Nahel bond tied to radiant ideals, unless their nature involves understanding and controlling destruction against odium's influence. The founding of the Order of Releasers would have occurred in the mythical era, following the departure of the Heralds after Aharietium, the last desolation according to human records, though the timeline is complex. As mankind discovered the Nahel bond, individuals capable of resonating with the ideals of controlled destruction and responsibility would have attracted Ash Spren. Their initial purpose during the desolation seems clearly defined by their abilities. They were the siege specialists among the Radiants. In an era of warfare against immensely powerful Voidbringers, fused commanding potent surges, and colossal entities like thunderclasts capable of leveling armies, the ability to strategically unmake enemy fortifications, dismantle powerful constructs, or destroy key enemy assets would have been invaluable. Imagine them meticulously reducing a Dawn City wall, to dust just before a windrunner assault, or precisely shattering the stone shell of a thunderclast to expose its core. Their role was likely specialized, requiring immense skill and fraught with risk. Were they feared even then, in the height of the Radiant Era? It seems likely, while respected for their power and the discipline required to wield it, the fundamental nature of division, its ability to utterly destroy, would have set them apart. Other orders built, protected, healed, illuminated, or transported. The releasers unmade. Even among their fellow Radiants, there might have been a degree of apprehension, an awareness of the fine line their brethren walked between controlled release and catastrophic loss of control. Their history likely began with a necessary, respected, but perhaps always slightly feared role in the defense of Roshar. Now let us turn our attention to the very heart of the releaser's power and reputation, the Surge of Division. Like all surge binding on Roshar, it operates within the intricate framework of Cosmere physics, grounded in realmatic theory and fueled by investiture, specifically stormlight or potentially other forms of invested light. You see, the Cosmere operates on the principle of 3 realms of existence. The physical realm, which is the reality we perceive. The cognitive realm, known as Shadesmar on Roshar, the realm of thought and perception. And the spiritual realm, the realm of connection, identity, and raw investiture. Magic throughout the Cosmere involves drawing investiture from the spiritual realm and manifesting its effects in the physical realm, often filtered through the cognitive realm via intent and perception. Surge binding is Roshar's primary magic system, involving the manipulation of fundamental forces or concepts, the 10 surges, using stormlight drawn from the high storms. Division is often described simply as the surge of destruction or decay. However, a more precise understanding suggests it manipulates the fundamental bonds holding matter together at an atomic or subatomic level. In Rosharan terms, this might relate to the axons, or fundamental connections described in fabrials and soul casting. It's not about creating destructive energy from nothing, but rather about precisely targeting and severing the connections that give matter its form and cohesion. This could manifest as accelerating natural entropy, causing wood to rot instantly, metal to rust in moments, or, more dramatically, releasing the potential energy stored within those bonds, resulting in effects akin to explosions or disintegration. The key distinction from simple brute force is the precision and the fundamental nature of the effect. It doesn't just break an object, it unmakes it, reducing it to simpler components like dust, ash, or gas. The stories we have give glimpses of its effects. We hear descriptions of radiance turning stone fortifications to dust, causing wood to splinter and explode, creating clouds of ash. Malata, a modern Dustbringer, uses it casually to carve footholds in stone, demonstrating a degree of fine control. Shalandavar, a lightweaver, expresses fear when observing her cryptic pattern, seemingly using a related ability to potentially cause soul-cast objects to decay or unravel, suggesting a connection between division and the stability of magically created matter. The potential effect on metals is significant. While likely more difficult than stone or wood due to metallic bonds, the ability to degrade or shatter metal would be a potent weapon against armored opponents or structures. Its effect on living flesh is rarely, if ever, directly depicted, suggesting it might be incredibly difficult, require immense power, or more likely, be strictly forbidden by the releaser's ideals due to the horrific implications. Imagine the level of control needed to sever only non-living matter, or the ethical catastrophe of losing control while targeting something near living beings. The surge of division likely operates on a spectrum of application. At one end lies incredible precision. A master releaser might theoretically be able to weaken a single point in a structure, causing a controlled collapse without widespread destruction. They might dismantle complex objects layer by layer, or perhaps even affect non-physical connections, using division to sever spiritual realm bonds, potentially impacting magical effects or even Nahel bonds themselves, though this is highly speculative. This level of control would require immense focus, understanding of the target's structure, and precise application of stormlight. At the other end of the spectrum is large-scale destruction. By applying division over a wide area or targeting the foundational structure of a large object, a releaser could potentially level fortifications, create vast clouds of obscuring dust and ash for battlefield control, or trigger catastrophic geological events like landslides by weakening rock formations. This area of effect application is likely what earned them the Dustbringer moniker, as its results are far more visible and terrifying than subtle, precise unmaking. How division interacts with different materials is crucial. Stone and wood seem particularly susceptible. Metals, with their stronger bonds, might require more stormlight or focus. Affecting liquids or gases seems less intuitive, as division targets bonds holding structured matter together. Perhaps it could rapidly decompose complex liquids or trigger chemical reactions in gases, but its primary application appears to be on solids. The most significant question revolves around its effect on invested objects. Can division degrade shard plate? Can it sever a shard blade? Can it affect Spren directly in the physical realm, or perhaps target the Radiant's bond to their Spren in the spiritual realm? Investiture typically resists other forms of investiture. Highly invested objects like shard plate and blades possess strong spiritual components and interconnectedness. Affecting them with division might require overwhelming amounts of stormlight, exceptional skill, or targeting the investiture itself, rather than just the physical medium. If possible, even with great difficulty, this ability would make the Dustbringers exceptionally potent against fused, enemy radiants, and other invested entities, offering a unique countermeasure unavailable to most other orders. Success in such an endeavor would signify an extremely high level of mastery and control, reinforcing the likely focus of their ideals. The dangers inherent in wielding division cannot be overstated. The potential for catastrophic collateral damage is immense. A miscalculation, a moment's loss of focus, could result in unintended destruction on a massive scale. Furthermore, the power could likely turn back on the user. Losing control might cause the releaser themselves to unravel, their own molecular bonds targeted by the very power they sought to command. This inherent risk underscores the absolute necessity for unwavering precision, intense focus, and likely a degree of emotional detachment during its use. The mental discipline required must have been extraordinary, perhaps exceeding even that needed for soul casting, as the consequences of failure are potentially far more immediate and devastating. The releaser must maintain perfect control over a force that fundamentally seeks to undo control. The Order of Dustbringers also had access to the Surge of Abrasion, which manipulates friction. While division was their defining power, the combination with abrasion offers intriguing possibilities. They could use abrasion to make surfaces incredibly smooth before applying division, allowing for cleaner, more precise breaks or cuts. Conversely, they could increase friction dramatically after weakening a material with division, causing it to shatter under stress. Perhaps division could be used to create fine dust or particles from stone or wood, and abrasion could then be used to whip these particles into blinding clouds or abrasive vortexes, making surfaces brittle with division, and then causing them to crumble or explode through sudden extreme changes in friction is another possibility. While division undoubtedly remained their primary focus and the source of their reputation, the synergistic potential with abrasion would have added another layer of versatility and danger to their toolkit, requiring yet more control and understanding to utilize effectively. The mastery of division wasn't just about wielding destruction. It was about understanding the fundamental forces of connection and friction and commanding them with precision and purpose. The power of a knight radiant is inextricably linked to the ideals they swear. These oaths, progressing through 5 levels unique to each order beyond the universal first ideal, shape the radiant spirit, strengthen their bond with their spren, and grant them increasing access to Stormlight and their surges. While the exact ideals of the releasers remain unconfirmed, beyond the first ideal common to all radiants, life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination, we can reflect on their likely nature. Consider the inherent danger of division, the Order's chosen name, Releasers. The attributes of their herald Chanarak, brave and obedient, and the general philosophy of the Knights Radiant centered on protection and honorable conduct, even when wielding destructive power. The ideals of the Releasers must have revolved around themes of control, responsibility, understanding, precision, and self-mastery. Wielding the power to unmake requires an extraordinary ethical framework and immense personal discipline. Therefore, their oaths likely served as increasingly stringent limitations and guides for the application of division. Imagine the progression of their later ideals. They might have spoken words akin to, "I will control the destruction I unleash," taking responsibility for its consequences, emphasizing direct accountability. Perhaps, "I will seek to understand the nature of what I destroy before I unmake it," focusing on knowledge and preventing impulsive use, implying respect even for that which must be destroyed. Maybe an ideal like, "I will release only that which must be broken," applying force with precision and restraint, speaking directly to the releaser name, framing their action not as mere destruction, but as a necessary, targeted unbinding. And crucially, perhaps something like, "I will master myself, my impulses, and my emotions before I seek to master the power of unmaking," highlighting the paramount importance of internal discipline when controlling external chaos. The name Releasers itself strongly suggests this philosophy of controlled, purposeful action. It frames their role not as simple destroyers, but as agents who release things from constraints, perhaps releasing energy trapped in matter, releasing enemies from fortifications, releasing corrupted entities from their existence, or even releasing populations from tyranny through the destruction of oppressive structures. This implies a necessary act of judgment, discernment, and profound control, distinguishing their actions from the wanton chaos often associated with destruction. The progression of their ideals would likely lead a releaser towards an ever deeper understanding of consequences, a more profound respect for the act of unmaking, and an increasingly restrictive application of their power, reserving it only for situations where it is truly necessary and can be precisely controlled. Imagine the internal struggle inherent in this path. A young releaser, newly bonded to an Ashes Sprain, would face the terrifying reality of their power. The constant fear of an accidental slip, of causing unintended devastation with a moment's lapse in concentration. The temptation, perhaps in moments of anger or desperation, to simply unleash the power, to let entropy reign. The psychological burden must have been immense. Unlike orders focused on growth, connection, or protection, the releasers dealt daily with the fundamental force of dissolution, maintaining sanity, adhering strictly to oaths that demand restraint while holding the ultimate tool of chaos would require a unique and powerful mindset. They would need to cultivate detachment without becoming callous, precision without losing sight of the larger picture, and responsibility without being crushed by the weight of their potential for harm. Their journey through the ideals would be less about embracing power and more about learning to perfectly contain and direct it. This internal focus on control inevitably clashes with the external perception embodied by the name Dustbringer. How did the releasers themselves navigate this divide? Did they view their role as a necessary, if unpleasant, aspect of maintaining balance or defending against intractable threats. Did they resent the fear they inspired, or did they perhaps accept the Dustbringer label with a grim irony, understanding that the common person could never truly grasp the discipline underlying their actions? Did their focus on precision and control lead to philosophical disagreements with other orders? Perhaps they viewed the Windrunners' focus on protecting individuals as naive when facing threats requiring large-scale destruction. Perhaps they clashed with the Skybreakers over methods. The Releasers focused on removing obstacles defined by necessity. The Skybreakers focused on enforcing laws defined by authority. Their unique position likely led to a degree of isolation, understood perhaps only by orders like the Skybreakers, who also dealt with difficult ethical judgments, but feared by many others for the sheer finality of their power. Their oaths were not just promises, but the very anchors keeping a terrifying force leashed, demanding a level of self-awareness and control perhaps unmatched among the Radiant Orders. Tracing the precise history of the Order of Releasers through the tumultuous ages of Roshar is like assembling a mosaic from scattered shards found amidst ruins. The records are fragmented, often biased, and filtered through the lens of fear that their powers inspired. Yet, by piecing together mentions in old texts, considering their likely roles based on their abilities, and engaging in some educated reflection, we can begin to sketch their path through the millennia of desolations and relative peace. Their primary role, confirmed by ancient texts and glimpses in Dalinar's visions, was that of siege specialists. In the cyclical wars against Odium's forces, this would have been a critical function. The Voidbringers, including the fused, cognitive shadows of ancient singers inhabiting new bodies and wielding void light, and their powerful constructs like thunderclasts, often utilized formidable defenses or represented threats too durable for conventional Radiant powers. The Releasers, with their surge of division, offered a unique solution. Imagine them approaching a fortress built by the fused, perhaps made of magically reinforced stone or soul-cast materials. While other Radiants engaged the defenders, the Releasers would focus their stormlight, meticulously identifying structural weaknesses, and with precise application of division, reducing key supports or entire wall sections to powder, creating breaches for Windrunners or Stonewards to exploit. Against colossal entities like thunderclasts, essentially giant suits of rock animated by void spren, division could be used to shatter their stony shells, exposing the animating spren within to other attacks. They might also have been tasked with destroying enemy fabrials, disrupting void light supply lines by destroying key infrastructure, or even clearing difficult terrain on the battlefield by turning obstacles into dust. Their deployment was likely strategic rather than widespread. Holding the power of unmaking, they wouldn't have been typical frontline soldiers used in every skirmish. Instead, they were probably held in reserve, deployed surgically against high-value targets where their unique abilities were indispensable. Picture a battlefield scenario. Stonewards holding a defensive line against a surge of Voidbringers, Windrunners providing air support and protecting civilians, while a small contingent of releasers, perhaps shielded by edge dancers providing distraction, move towards a heavily fortified enemy command post or a powerful, fused general. With intense concentration, they unravel the structure or target the fused's defenses, creating a critical vulnerability that turns the tide of the battle. Their presence would be a game changer, but also a source of tension. Their allies relying on their power while perhaps simultaneously fearing its potential to go awry. Their interactions with other Radiant Orders would have been complex and multifaceted. Fear was likely a constant factor, leading perhaps to a degree of isolation. However, their unique capabilities would also have fostered respect and necessity. Windrunners, focused on protecting and leading, might have relied on releasers to clear paths through rubble or fortifications during evacuations or assaults. Stonewards, masters of defense and endurance, might have formed tactical partnerships, the Stonewards holding an impregnable line, while the releasers systematically dismantled the enemy's siege engines or fortifications. This relationship, however, could also be fraught with philosophical tension. The Stonewards embodied resilience, the ideal of standing firm against all odds, while the releasers embodied entropy, the principle of breaking things down. This fundamental opposition in their core concepts might have led to disagreements on strategy or ethics. When is it right to stand firm, and when is it necessary to break things apart? They might have found common ground with the Skybreakers, another order often viewed with apprehension. Both orders wielded powers that required immense judgment and dealt with potentially lethal consequences. The Skybreakers enforcing laws, the Releasers wielding destruction. They might have shared a certain pragmatic, perhaps detached worldview, born from the difficult choices their powers forced upon them. Conversely, their methods might have clashed. The Skybreakers adhering to external codes of law, the Releasers likely guided by internal ideals focused on necessity and control, potentially leading to situations where the Releasers deemed destruction necessary, even if it violated Skybreaker legal interpretations. Historical mentions of the Dustbringers are often colored by fear. Texts might speak of their terrifying power in battle, focusing on the destruction wrought rather than the control exercised. Dalinar's visions, granted by the Stormfather and showing glimpses of the past, occasionally feature Radiants who might be Dustbringers, often in roles involving breaking through enemy lines or destroying key targets, reinforcing their role as siege specialists. Their involvement in major historical events like the suppression of the hierarchy, a period when religious authorities attempted to control surge binding, is plausible. Ironically, the Releasers, masters of controlled destruction, might have been called upon to help dismantle the power structures of those who sought to abuse or suppress surge-binding, using their precise power against uncontrolled magic or tyrannical rule. During the False Desolation, a premature return of hostilities after the Heralds abandoned the Oath Pact, the Radiants, including presumably the Releasers, stood against the threat alone. Did their actions during this period, perhaps undertaken with less guidance from the Heralds, contribute to their increasingly negative reputation? Over the millennia, the perception of the Order likely shifted. What began as respect for necessary specialists might have curdled into fear as memories of specific battles faded, leaving only tales of their destructive capacity. Perhaps incidents where control was lost, whether accidentally or through a radiant falling to darker impulses, created lasting cultural trauma, exaggerated through centuries of retelling. Propaganda might also have played a role, especially after the recreants, as organizations like the Vorin Church sought to discredit the fallen Radiants, painting the Dustbringers as inherently chaotic and dangerous to justify their condemnation. Their history, therefore, is not just a record of battles fought and enemies destroyed, but also a chronicle of evolving fear, misunderstanding, and the gradual erosion of nuance, leaving behind the stark, terrifying image of the Dustbringer, while the disciplined Releaser faded into forgotten lore. In modern Roshar, centuries removed from the Knights Radiant's golden age, the name Dustbringer carries a palpable weight of fear and revulsion, arguably more so than any other order. Characters react to the name with immediate apprehension, associating it instinctively with indiscriminate destruction and uncontrolled power. But why does this particular order inspire such unique dread, even compared to others wielding formidable or ethically complex abilities? Unraveling the Dustbringer mythos requires examining the nature of their power, the impact of historical trauma, and how they stand in contrast to their radiant brethren. The primary source of this fear undoubtedly stems from the visceral nature of the surge of division itself, turning solid matter, stone, wood, potentially even metal, into dust, ash, or fragments feels fundamentally terrifying. It speaks to a power that doesn't merely break or move things, but unmakes them, reducing them to their simplest components, seemingly erasing their existence. This resonates with primal human fears of annihilation, chaos, and the irreversible loss of form and structure. Unlike the surge of gravitation, wielded by windrunners and skybreakers, which involves directed force and movement, or transformation, soul-casting used by light-weavers and else-callers, which changes form but preserves substance in a structured way, division appears as pure negation, its entropy weaponized. This perceived lack of control, the image of things simply falling apart into nothingness, is inherently more disturbing to the common observer than focused force or controlled change. The very term Dustbringer reinforces this perception. Language is powerful, and this moniker, likely bestowed by outsiders, rather than chosen by the Order itself, focuses entirely on the destructive outcome. It evokes images of ruin, decay, and the aftermath of disaster. It lacks any nuance regarding the control, precision, or potential necessity that the name Releasers implies. Over centuries, this evocative, fear-laden name has likely cemented itself in the cultural consciousness, overshadowing any more complex understanding of the Order's actual philosophy or function. People fear what they associate with the name, and the name is synonymous with ultimate destruction. Historical trauma, both real and perhaps exaggerated, likely plays a significant role. While specific incidents are lost to detailed record, it's highly probable that over millennia of warfare, there were instances where division was used excessively, accidentally caused widespread collateral damage, or was perhaps even wielded by a releaser who fell from their ideals. A single catastrophic event, a city wall collapsing incorrectly, a stray blast hitting unintended targets, a battle causing unforeseen environmental damage, could create legends that would persist for generations, growing more terrifying with each retelling. After the recreance, when knowledge of the Radiants became suppressed and fragmented, these negative stories might have been selectively preserved or embellished by groups seeking to demonize the old orders, ensuring that the Dustbringers were remembered only for their most destructive potential. Comparing the fear of Dustbringers to the perception of other orders highlights its unique quality. The Skybreakers are feared, but primarily for their rigid adherence to law and their authority to execute judgment. It's a fear of inflexible justice, of authority wielded without mercy. The Bondsmiths, incredibly rare and powerful, inspire awe and perhaps apprehension due to their sheer scale of power and connection to divinity, but not typically outright terror. Lightweavers are often mistrusted due to their association with illusion, deception, and spying, a fear of the unknown, of not being able to trust what you see. The fear of Dustbringers seems different, less tied to judgment, authority, or deception, and more rooted in the perceived uncontrollability and finality of their power. It's the fear of a force that seems to operate outside the normal rules of cause and effect, a power that simply erases things from existence. This fundamental difference in the nature of their surge, combined with a fear-inducing name and the likely amplification of negative historical events, has created a potent mythos that continues to shadow the Order in the modern era, making their potential return a source of deep anxiety for the people of Roshar. They represent not just power, but the terrifying potential for power to become pure, unmaking chaos. The Recreance stands as the most tragic and pivotal event in the history of the Knights Radiant. It was the day, centuries ago, when nearly all Radiants simultaneously abandoned their oaths, relinquishing their shard blades and shard plate, effectively dissolving the orders and leaving humanity vulnerable. The reasons behind this mass abandonment were complex, primarily stemming from the shocking discovery that the Parshendi, or Singers, long considered the monstrous Voidbringers, were actually the original inhabitants of Roshar, and humans were the invaders who had brought odium with them from their previous world, Ashin. This revelation shattered the ethical foundations upon which many Radiants had built their lives and sworn their ideals. For the Order of Releasers, this crisis of conscience might have been particularly acute, forcing them to confront the very nature and justification of their destructive power. Imagine the perspective of a Releaser Knight Radiant standing at Feverstone Keep, the traditional site of the Recreants. Their entire existence, their progression through the ideals, was likely predicated on the responsible and controlled use of division for the greater good, primarily the defense of humanity against the perceived existential threat of the Voidbringers. Their oaths probably emphasized understanding consequences, applying force only when necessary, and mastering the self to prevent misuse of their terrifying power. Then comes the revelation, the enemy they had been unmaking, the fortifications they had reduced to dust, the battles where they unleashed entropy to protect human settlements. All might have been directed against the planet's original stewards, defending their homes from human encroachment. This realization would strike at the very core of a Releaser's justification for wielding division. If their past actions, undertaken with the belief they were protecting the innocent, were in fact acts of aggression against the wronged party, how could they continue? How could they trust any future command or perceived necessity to unleash destruction? For an order built upon the bedrock of control and responsibility, the discovery that their power had been fundamentally misapplied, even unknowingly, could render their oaths untenable. Continuing to wield division under such circumstances might feel like the ultimate irresponsibility, the ultimate failure of control. The risk of future misuse, fueled by potentially flawed justifications, might seem too great. Unlike a windrunner who might question who to protect, or a light weaver questioning what truths to reveal, the Releaser confronts the possibility that their fundamental action, destruction, was historically unjust. For them, breaking their oaths might have felt not like a betrayal, but like the only ethically responsible course of action left, a final act of restraint. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Were they pressured by other orders? Possibly. The shockwave of the revelation undoubtedly led to intense debate and soul-searching among all Radiants. Perhaps orders more focused on diplomacy or understanding pushed for cessation, while others wrestled with the implications for their own oaths. But the Dustbringers' decision likely stemmed primarily from their unique relationship with destruction and responsibility. The impact of this abandonment on their bonded Ashspren would have been devastating. mirroring the trauma experienced by all Spren, whose bonds were severed during the recreance. The breaking of the Nahel bond, particularly when done simultaneously by so many radiants, tore at the Spren's cognitive and spiritual essence, leaving them as dead-eyes, mindless, eternally screaming remnants trapped between realms. Did the specific nature of division have a unique effect on the Ash-Spren during this process? It's conceivable. If their bond involved intricately managing the forces of entropy and connection, the sudden, violent severing might have been particularly damaging, perhaps leaving the Ash-Spren in a state of perpetual dissolution or chaotic fragmentation in the cognitive realm, their screams echoes of unmaking turned inward. This might contribute to why Ash-Spren seem particularly rare or hesitant to bond in the modern era. The collective trauma of the recreants might linger more powerfully within their specific type of Spren consciousness. The legacy of the Dustbringers' participation in the recreants likely solidified their already fearsome reputation in the eyes of subsequent generations. To outsiders, unaware of the profound ethical crisis that likely drove them, their abandonment might have been interpreted as proof of their inherent instability, their untrustworthiness, or the uncontrollable nature of their power. Even the Dustbringers couldn't handle their own destruction, might have become the simplified, damning narrative. Their act of ultimate restraint could easily have been twisted into a story of ultimate failure or betrayal. The shard blades and shard plate they relinquished that day became objects of awe and terror, passed down through families won in battle, symbols of power divorced from the oaths that once gave them meaning. A Dustbringer blade, perhaps darker, more utilitarian in appearance than others, would carry with it the weight of its former owner's reputation, a weapon associated with pure destruction, its history likely fueling fear and dark legends. The Recreants, therefore, marked not only the end of the Releasers as an active order, but also the beginning of the solidification of the Dustbringer myth, cementing their image as agents of uncontrollable chaos in the annals of Rosharan history, their true nature buried under layers of fear and the ashes of their abandoned oaths. For centuries following the Recreants, the Order of Dustbringers, like all Knights Radiant, faded into myth and fearful legend. Their Ash-Spren, traumatized by the mass betrayal, largely withdrew from the physical realm, or remained as Deadeyes, making new Nahel bonds exceedingly rare, perhaps even more so than for other types of Spren, given the potential depth of their recreants' trauma, the knowledge of their ideals, their internal philosophy of release, and the true nature of their controlled power was lost, replaced entirely by the terrifying image of the Dustbringer. However, the dawn of the true desolation, marked by the return of the Fused and the coming of the Everstorm, has stirred the Spren of Roshar once more, and faint embers of the ancient orders have begun to glow again in the darkness. Among them, albeit tenuously, are the Dustbringers. Their current state is one of near extinction. Unlike the Windrunners or Lightweavers, who have seen a relative resurgence with numerous individuals bonding on her spreen, and cryptics, Dustbringers, remain exceptionally rare. Why might Ashspren be so hesitant to form new bonds? The trauma of the recreants is one likely factor. Another might be the very nature of the individuals they seek. If the releaser ideals demand extraordinary self-control, discipline, and a willingness to bear the burden of destructive power responsibly, perhaps few individuals in the modern, fractured world of Roshar possess the necessary psychological and ethical framework to attract an Ashspren and swear those difficult oaths. Furthermore, the pervasive fear surrounding the Dustbringer name might itself create a barrier. Potential candidates might recoil from the power or the associated reputation, preventing the resonance needed for a bond to form. Into this near vacuum steps Malata, the primary example of a modern Dustbringer encountered in the Stormlight Archive. Her existence proves that Ashspren are indeed bonding again, but her character presents a complex and potentially worrying picture of what the Order might become. Introduced as a seemingly unassuming Ardent, Malata reveals herself to be a Radiant. Bonded to an unnamed Ashspren she refers to dismissively. Her personality is marked by a distinctive pragmatism, a detached curiosity, and what appears to be a lack of conventional morality. She seems more interested in understanding and utilizing her power than in adhering to any grand ethical code. Details about her Nahel bond are scarce. We don't know how or why her Ashspren chose her, nor the circumstances of their bonding. Her relationship with her Spren seems strained, or perhaps simply utilitarian. She doesn't display the camaraderie or deep connection seen between Kaladin and Syl, or Shallan and Pattern. Critically, there's little evidence to suggest she is progressing through the traditional ideals. While she presumably swore the first ideal, her actions and mindset don't strongly align with the hypothesized later ideals centered on control, restraint, and responsibility. She uses division somewhat casually, creating footholds in walls without apparent deep consideration, though she also demonstrates significant control in doing so. Perhaps most telling is her affiliation. Malata chose to join Taravangian's Diagram, a secret organization dedicated to saving humanity, but willing to employ ruthless and morally reprehensible methods to achieve its goals. This ends justify the means philosophy seems to resonate with Malata's pragmatic nature. Her willingness to ally with Taravangian, even after witnessing his darker aspects, suggests that her interpretation of wielding destructive power might lean towards achieving a desired outcome, regardless of the ethical compromises involved. Does this reflect a potential shift in the Dustbringer philosophy for the modern era? Or is Malata simply an outlier, an individual who gained power without fully embracing the traditional path of restraint? Malata might represent a dangerous potential evolution, or perhaps devolution, of the releaser ideals. The original order likely balanced the necessity of destruction with profound self-mastery, and ethical limitation. Malata's approach seems to prioritize the outcome, the release from perceived threats or obstacles, like old power structures, incompetent rulers, or even opposing radiance, potentially neglecting the crucial elements of internal discipline and consequence awareness that likely defined the ancient releasers. She embodies the Dustbringer aspect, the effective application of destructive power, perhaps without the tempering influence of the releaser philosophy. The challenges facing any attempt to rebuild the Order are immense. First and foremost is overcoming the millennia of fear and prejudice associated with the Dustbringer name. Any new members would face immediate suspicion and hostility. Finding individuals who not only attract an Ashspren, but also possess the unique combination of courage, discipline, and ethical grounding to swear the ideals and safely control division will be incredibly difficult. Added to this is the near-complete lack of historical knowledge or guidance. Unlike the Windrunners who have Kaladin rediscovering oaths, or the Bondsmiths guided by the Stormfather, any new releasers would be navigating their path almost entirely in the dark, potentially making Malata's pragmatic, consequence-focused approach seem more appealing or even necessary. Yet their potential role in the true desolation is undeniable. In a war against Odium's seemingly endless forces, including immortal fused and powerful constructs, the controlled application of division could be invaluable. Imagine Dustbringers precisely dismantling the Everstorm's fabrial infrastructure, weakening key fortifications held by the enemy, neutralizing powerful fused abilities by targeting their investiture or regalia, or strategically destroying terrain to channel enemy forces or create defensive positions. The ethical dilemmas would be constant. When is large-scale destruction justified? What level of collateral damage is acceptable? How can they wield such power without becoming the monsters history portrays them as? The future of the Order hangs in the balance. Will they manage to reclaim the name Releasers, rediscovering and embodying the ancient ideals of control and responsibility? Or will the pressures of the modern war, the lack of guidance, and the influence of figures like Malata push them down a different path? One where the destructive power of the Dustbringer overshadows the disciplined philosophy of the Releaser. Their reemergence is not just about regaining lost power, but about redefining their identity in a world that remembers only the fear associated with their name. The flickering embers could ignite into a controlled flame, serving the cause of Roshar's defense, or they could erupt into an uncontrolled conflagration, validating the darkest interpretations of the Dustbringer mythos. Our journey through the shadowed history of the Dustbringers, the Releasers, comes to a close for tonight. We began with the paradox of their herald, Chanarak, whose attributes of bravery and obedience hint not at chaos, but at the courage and discipline needed to command the terrifying surge of division. We explored the nature of that surge, a power not merely of destruction, but of fundamental unmaking, operating on the very bonds of existence, demanding unparalleled control to wield safely. We speculated on the lost ideals they must have sworn, oaths likely centered on responsibility, understanding, precision, and the profound burden of self-mastery required to keep entropy itself leashed. We sifted through the ashes of history, envisioning their crucial role as siege specialists during the desolations, respected yet perhaps always feared, their interactions with other orders complex and potentially strained. We confronted the weight of their perception, the Dustbringer mythos born from the visceral fear of their power, amplified by historical trauma, misunderstanding, and the very language used to describe them, obscuring the likely reality of the disciplined releasers. We contemplated their agonizing choice during the recreance, where the revelation of humanity's past might have rendered the responsible use of their destructive power ethically impossible, leading them to abandon their oaths as a final act of control. And we observed the faint, flickering embers of their re-emergence in the modern era, embodied by the pragmatic and morally ambiguous Malata, highlighting the immense challenges and uncertain future facing this nearly lost order. The story of the Releasers is a profound meditation on the nature of power and responsibility within the Cosmere. More than perhaps any other Radiant Order, they embody the terrible symmetry between creation and destruction, structure and entropy. Their surge is a fundamental force, necessary in certain contexts, yet always perilous. Their history serves as a cautionary tale about how easily perception can overshadow reality, how fear can distort understanding, and how even the most disciplined power can be viewed as monstrous when its mechanisms and motivations are not comprehended. What future awaits them in the crucible of the true desolation remains unwritten. Can they overcome millennia of ingrained fear to reclaim their place as protectors? Can they find individuals capable of navigating the treacherous path of their ideals, mastering both the power of division and the discipline of self? Will they rediscover the ancient philosophy of the Releasers, focusing on controlled, necessary unmaking? Or will they succumb to the pragmatism exemplified by Malata, becoming the very agents of calculated destruction that Roshar has always feared them to be? Their potential impact is immense, a force capable of turning the tide against Odium's legions, but also a force capable of catastrophic misuse if their ancient traditions of restraint are not rediscovered or reforged. The Dustbringers force us to consider the uncomfortable necessity of destruction in a world striving for preservation, the role of entropy in a system built on connection and oaths. They remind us that true strength often lies not in the power wielded, but in the wisdom and restraint that governs its use. Theirs is a complex, shadowed path, and understanding them requires looking beyond the dust and ash, seeking the disciplined hand, the focused mind, and the heavy heart that must accompany the power to unmake. Thank you for joining me in the quiet hours, exploring the often shadowed paths of the Cosmere.